Hi, I'm Othais, and this is the Argentine Mauser model of 1891 all over again. This time, however, it's a little carbine. And if that story isn't enough, I also have something else up my sleeve. But first, Lightbox. With an overall length of 37 inches and weighing in at just 7.2 pounds, this is a dandy little darling compared to that giant long rifle. Of course, it's meant for cavalry use. It is still a Mauser action, feeding 5 rounds from a stripper clip, these being the exact same as the rifle, the 7.65 Belgian. Now, I cannot express enough how grateful we are that we get to make this show. It's a monumental effort, consuming both long hours and hard currency. Thankfully, we only have to give up one in order to receive the other. That is, of course, so long as you are willing to help. Just a few dollars a month, and we'll keep the documentaries coming. I will not lie, if every regular viewer, the guys that show up for every single primer episode, gave $1 a month, we could hire enough help to add a whole other show. But in the meantime, while we're waiting on that, we're getting a bit of help from our friends over at Ballistol. And you can tell I'm using it because my stuff's stuck to it. Having survived the Second World War, Ballistol's parent company had managed to struggle along until Dr. Helmut Clever's passing away in 1970, following which a young chemist, Dr. Heinrich Zettler, joined the company, becoming director in 1973. In 1977, facing pressure from Leverkusen, Ballistol's operation was relocated to Aachen in Lower Bavaria. Now, I'll give you the last of that history lesson next time, and then of course we'll get to explore some of the now available products, besides of course this miracle oil. In the meantime, we could probably talk about a gun, I guess. Last time we covered the development, adoption, and the mostly calm service of the Argentinian Mauser 1891, but it was this'n. An early smokeless rifle, this was a 5-shot bolt-action repeater adopted by Argentina and also purchased in lots by Spain, Bolivia, and Peru. The 1891 had been an evolution of the Belgian model of 1889, further refined beyond the changes made for the Ottoman 1890. At the time of the 1891's adoption, neither of the rifles had been adapted for a carbine. We have a whole episode further detailing what eventually became the Model 1889 carbines for Belgium, but those do not appear to have influenced Argentina. Given the German influence thus far, it's believed the Carabiner 1888 was the inspiration for the 1891's general layout and its size. Design and production of the carbine lagged slightly behind the rifle. Recall from last time, the first contract, signed November 4th of 1891, only covered 25,000 long rifles, and 10,000 carbines were added on November 20th, along with another 25,000 rifles. The carbines were priced at just 75 francs. This included accessories, but obviously no bayonet. This price fell to 73.25 during renegotiation. Despite being requested just behind the rifles, that doesn't mean they were delivered as quickly. At the time that this was signed, the expected carbine would have been a shortened bayonetless version of the first pattern of 1891 long rifle. However, the carbines weren't finished on paper until 1892, and production didn't get underway until late that year or maybe early 1893. This was after some changes for the rifles were ready to be put into production. With that in mind, it's probably easiest if I explain what the carbine features are by just showing you this one here with the camera. This gun is a lot shorter than before. Let's go ahead and look at the front where things have been cut down. Ooh-wee, what have we got here? We have a nose cap held by a screw. It doesn't actually protect the crown or anything like that of the muzzle, but it does protect our front sight with very stubby winglings. Look at that. There is of course no provision for a cleaning rod because none was issued with this gun. Instead you used a pull-through that's carried in the rest of your kit. If we bring her on down, we have a barrel band with no loop whatsoever on it. It is held in place by a spring though. We also have, well, a handguard just like the rifle, held by 2 copper wires, and our rear sight. This is a T-Tiny Leaf, graduated to 1400 meters, and I believe this one was adapted for Spitzer. A unique feature of the carbine rear sight is that it does lock into the folded position. Let me see if I can get you a clear enough angle. Take note, there is a tab on the slider, a notch in the base. If we pull that back, boy, that looks unlocked to me. So now we can flip this guy up, although he is Oh, a little bit stiff regardless. There we go. Always good to do on camera, right? Now we can adjust our adorable little long-range sight. If we want to put her away, there, and forward. I suspect this was done in order to prevent any sort of accident, placing the carbine into its holster on the saddle. Pretty good idea. Now the action, bolt, everything else is the same as the long rifle, except we have a turn down handle, and at the front, this gun incorporates the first of the improvements, one that was applied retroactively to specifically the carbines, the locking screw. This means we can no longer simply release the magazine by pressing on our button here. We must take a screwdriver and turn this guy out of lock. Let me see if I can get you a better look at it. There's our oblong projection, a notch in the magazine body, and if you take a screwdriver, in my case a stripper clip, and just go ahead and rotate that around, eventually it will clear the body and you'll be able to take the magazine out for cleaning and maintenance. This kept little accidents from happening. Now, my carbine is from the early contract, so that magazine lock is basically the only improvement. There is no extension off the side of the cocking shroud, although later carbines will have the other rifle upgrades. Being for cavalry, the only sling loop on the gun is here, underneath the wrist, behind the trigger guard. This was a single point clip for a cavalry sling that would have gone across the shoulder. Now, functionally, this is the same as the rifle, same cartridge even, so I don't think we need an animation. Instead, let's get it straight into Mae's little hands. I know I'm kind of a big dude, but I really love little carbines like this. They're so cute. Service and even foreign sales of the 1891 carbine tended to mirror the rifles. The 1891 contract was for 10,000. The March 1893 contract stipulated another 5,000. Supposedly, these were taken by Spain and then replaced with 5,000 more, though it's a little unclear as presented in Webster's excellent book. There were none in the 1895 contract, but 16,000 more in the one from August 1898. 500 of these were ceded to the Republic of Bolivia and were not replaced for Argentina. 4,000 more were sent to Peru, of which only 2,500 were replaced. Now, surprisingly, with the adoption of the 1909 cavalry carbine, which again was longer and more of a short rifle like the Kar-98A, these guys managed to stay in service, perhaps better than their rifle counterparts. Largely, they are updated to Spitzer rear sights, although not exclusively. They're pretty hard to tell apart, if I'm honest. It's the same general structure. Now, one additional modification was made to this gun well beyond the long rifles, which tells us that these stayed in service, much more frontline service, than the rest, although it was probably mostly for second line use, perhaps even police. It all began, again, with changes made to the 1909. You see, these were first fitted with the same cavalry sling position, behind the trigger, just like the 1891. However, they were modified to use bayonets and to be side-slung in 1926, allowing the 1909 cavalry to become a universal carbine. The same was later expected of the old 1891 carbines, which had proven more useful to have around than the long rifles and were still in more service. In March of 1931, the Director General of Military Arsenal signed a contract for the modification of existing 1891 cavalry carbines. They chose to add a set of bands, one upper and one lower, which allowed them to fit a bayonet. In addition, the single cavalry sling loop was replaced with a set of slings on the side, mirroring the earlier changes to the 1909. The guns were also refinished in a deep black at this time. Bayonets were recycled from the existing surplus of Remington Model 1879s. The blades were shortened, their oversized rings were cut, and a crosspiece was welded on so that they would fit the available hardware. A scratch-built replacement bayonet was also later produced. The conversion work was undertaken by Hispano-Argentino Fábrica de Automóviles Sociedad Anónima, more commonly shortened to HAFDASA. This was to be their first foray into arms manufacture, which would soon expand further. They were hired to convert 5,043 Model 1891 carbines to the new pattern. While this was accomplished, it was apparently a bit slapdash. The 1909s had been converted by Fritz Werner and came out beautifully, but the HAFDASA work was frankly somewhat crude. Many bayonets fit poorly, usually loose, and the finish was frankly rough. I don't have an example here today, but I'm fairly sure it would just be a bit heavier and otherwise shoot the same since the core action wasn't changed. And with that, we've covered the 1891 and its variants as used in Argentina, Spain, and Bolivia. We also mentioned purchases by Peru. Recall, they had acquired 16,000 rifles and 4,000 carbines in 1901. These were taken from the ongoing Argentine 1898 contract. The crests on these rifles were removed and replaced with that of Peru. These were likely used in two border disputes with Ecuador in 1903 and 1904, and though technically replaced in service, were probably still the primary arm in the 1910 campaign of the Manuripe region, fought against Bolivia. The replacement rifle, by the way, was the Peruvian model of 1909, essentially a German Gewehr 98, chambered for a Spitzer 7.65 Argentine cartridge, including the bizarre distinction of keeping the Langevisier rear sight. Like Argentina, introducing the Spitzer cartridge and a new rifle, Peru then turned to updating their existing 1891s. And this is where our show gets just a bit theoretical, because there are two competing narratives on the Peruvian conversion, and it's actually not even impossible for both of them to be true. Neither, however, have primary source data available to me that I would completely trust. The big disagreement is the date. The first claim is that this began in 1911 or 1912. The second is that it was done much later, around 1934. Otherwise, the stories are similar, mostly because the rest is immediately clear of observation of the rifles themselves, like, we'll say this one here that I have, the Peruvian Mauser model of 1891, maybe 1912. Let's get into the light box. With an overall length just clearing 48 1/2 inch, this thing is just like the original 1891 Argentine, until we look at the weight, which has jumped up to just over 9 pounds. That's likely thanks to a much heavier barrel. Otherwise, the rifle should be fairly familiar, as it is a single stack magazine feeding 5 rounds of 7.65 Mauser, Spitzer this time, from a stripper clip. However, our rear sight is a little weird. In updating the rifles to Spitzer, Peru found that the barrels were fairly worn, likely from a combination of poor maintenance and rough use. They were used repeatedly for training instead of buying new rifles. New barrels and updated Spitzer rear sights were purchased from Switzerland. Specifically, Schweizerische Industriegesellschaft, also known as SIG. Fun fact, all the way back into the 1930s, SIG was often displayed like this, with what I'm assuming is not a J, but a fancy German I, which is why you see it marked as such on the Peruvian barrels. However, the conversion itself seems to have been done in Peru. Since their standard rifle used the Langevisier, when they made the change on the 1891s, the same feature was carried over to keep training and handling the same. Since I have one here, let's get a look at how this differs from a standard 91. Now, the back half of this gun is identical to the Argentine until we get right up to this rear sight and then down the barrel itself, which is a very beefy boy. As a matter of fact, you can see where it was stepped down in order to be able to take the original bayonet. That is very thick all the way back. We have a driftable front sight, very tall and proud and easily read. And, well, actually the rest of this is standard hardware. The original bayonet lug is the same, the cleaning rod's the same, although this is the soft steel version. And if we come on back, mid-band is the same, all that goodness. Right here is where we have a little inaccuracy on my particular rifle. This handguard, which doesn't even color match, is supposed to come all the way up to this band. It's clear that this is an Argentine long handguard that has been modified to attempt to fit this rifle and almost made it. The method by which it attaches is correct, however. A single copper wire near the front, and at the back, it's actually dovetailed up under a groove set on the front of the sight base. This is a carryover from the 1909 rifle and how it fits its handguard. So if you adopt the sight, you might as well adopt the handguard fitment, use those same components. The rear sight is, of course, the German Lange Visier, which is run from 400 all the way up to 2,000 meters. It is symmetrical, so without bopping anything, it's the same on both sides. And you have to press both buttons in order to get her going. And once you do, you should have an alternating button option. So right now the right side is proud. If I press that, I can move by, I believe, 50 meters. And then if I press the other side, I can move by another 50 meters. That way you can carefully walk in your aim without overshooting. Pun intended. Being a proper Peruvian contract rifle, it would have had the Peruvian crest at one point. You can barely make it out here because these were heavily refinished when the barrels were fitted. Almost all are faded or almost gone like this is now. If we look at the barrel itself, we can see our SIG markings, S, J, G, or what I'm told is a very Germanic I. All right, I know what you guys are all thinking, and the answer is yes, I did let Mae shoot this. So let's get it out on the range. This is so weird. Okay, anyway. Apparently, these long rifles weren't everything that Peru needed, because there are also a fair representation of carbines in the market as well. These were made by shortening the long rifles, and were also fitted with new barrels and rear sights. Like the long guns, we're not 100% sure of when these were created, or how many were made, for that matter. I sincerely hope that this episode shakes out some more data, and we get to redo it someday. Now, with all the hardware covered, let's discuss service life once more, because this gets weird. Overall, it appears that these updated Peruvian 1891s were intended for reserve and police duty. It's extremely unlikely that they saw combat. The only likely candidate would be the Leticia War against Colombia, but that happened in 1932 and 33, so only possible if they were converted beforehand, unlike some suggestions of 1934. The original Mauser 1891, plus some updates, didn't see much in the way of combat with Argentina either, but it seems a few were involved in fighting between Paraguay and Bolivia. Now, the latter we understand, they bought rifles straight out of the Argentine contracts. Paraguay, however, is more unusual. To my knowledge, they did not officially purchase the 1891. Instead, they had actually bought the Mauser model of 1895. These were apparently in 7mm Mauser, which is confusing because when they later adopted an updated rifle, the model 1907, which is very, very similar to the Peruvian 1909, by the way, when they adopted this, it was in 7.65mm, not 7. It seems that over years of strife, Argentina had been secretly supplying their neighbor with 1891 Mausers. This was done quietly because Argentina was trying to woo both Paraguay and its own adversary, Bolivia, at the same time. A delicate balancing act for sure, and one that many use to explain why so many of the 1891s lack crests of any kind. Like mine, we saw last time, ground right off, and clearly a different finish. The possibly apocryphal story is that an Argentine crested rifle was found in the hands of Paraguayan forces by their Bolivian opponents. This caused a kerfuffle that resulted in Argentina ordering that all rifles that left government service have their crests ground off. Supposedly, this was rescinded sometime later for reasons, and that's why Model 1909s, which were surplus later, aren't ground off the same way. It seems more likely to me that those guns given to Paraguay or others were ground at the time that they were given away, and the 1909 wasn't handed out to any of these secretive allies, but I cannot say for sure. Heck, I don't even know when the rifles were handed over. Suggestions range from the Paraguayan Liberation Revolution of 1904 to the Paraguayan Civil War of 1911, or the second one in 1922, or even as late as the Chaco War, in which Bolivia and Paraguay faced off, usually with their more updated Mausers. But both potentially could have been carrying 1891s in reserve rolls. Sadly, we might not ever learn the hard truth of the ground-off crests, as the whole point seems to have been to not tell anyone what was going on. Let's finish things up by checking back in with the father of the Argentine Mauser, though. Pablo Riccieri was appointed director of arsenals in 1898, then to Army Chief of Staff as a full colonel. In 1899, he began a major reform of the Argentine Army, which became the standard beyond World War II. In 1900, he became Minister of War. In 1904, he was promoted to Brigadier General, and in 1910, a Division General. He served as a military observer during World War I and retired from the Army in 1921. In 1934, he was promoted to Lieutenant General. He passed away in 1936. Whew, okay, we made it, folks, which means we can now take the time to ask Mae what it's like handling both, well, not this guy at all, but rather this little carbine and this big old heavy barrel Peruvian 1891/whatever. Let's go see Mae. All right, once more, we've made room for Mae.
We did.
And that didn't take a lot of space for this little guy.
God, I love it.
This little carbine has turned more heads than anything we brought in a while.
It really has.
So what's it like? Let's get the ergonomics down. Go straight into it. Coming from the long rifle, how does this feel?
Fantastic. And it really does feel amazing to go from what was a fairly, frankly, heavy and long Mauser-style rifle to this guy. Mm-hmm. Like, it's automatic difference in feel. Like, I wanted to feel how it might be to run with this guy, just to kind of give a test with it.
Okay, so you'd rather carry this around?
Definitely, there is that.
Okay.
And then good solid length on it. The balance point is right at the mag,
That's
practically.
A lot better.
Yeah, it's way better than what it was. I mean, no semi-pistol grip, but actually I really like these little fixed slings that they have underneath. It kind of gives me a solid place to purchase up against with my pinky.
You have just the right hand shape for that?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. You probably not so much. You probably loop over a little bit.
Not as ideal.
Yeah, that's fair. Comb height felt pretty decent. Overall, I was just pretty jazzed, actually, to get this style of rifle or carbine again, because it reminds me of our Serbian 1908 that we got to have before. That boy was amazing.
That's true. This is not that, though.
No. And it's
no
not
semi-pistol grip stock.
It's not the Spanish Mauser.
You've got this
1895 either.
No, but the 1895, I think, takes cues from this one.
Yeah.
I believe a lot of firearms kind of, the Mauser branch borrowed from the Car 88 and then became this. And then everything else sort of copied this, at least all those snub nose designs. Which I actually kind of love. I love the snub-nosed Mauser carbines. They look really cute.
It's also not our Swede boy.
No, I know you like... I think that might be slightly longer, too.
It might be.
Not this. The Swede
no,
is
the
longer.
Swede, yeah. So I'm thinking about, like, this actually feels pretty dang good.
No, that's pretty petite.
Yeah.
But no, when this came in, it was shipped in, and one of the ladies at the FFL, and then several of the guys over at Friday night when we get together, and I just happen to have it with me that day.
Right.
They're all going, oh wow.
Right, yeah.
And by the way, they've probably seen a dozen of them at the gun show, but they've never bothered to pick one up. And so...
Well, it seems like if you're just looking at a rack, it just seems kind of a little, I guess, unremarkable. Maybe it's only when it's in profile that you kind of, for me, profile really does a huge thing on it because you see that snub nose front and then you see just everything else combined. You go, oh, wait, there's a lot of potential with this guy.
Yes, they're very nice. The carbines are very rarely sporterized in the U.S. I think a lot of people realize how handy they were just the way they are.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But also still not the most desirable collectible in the U.S. market. Like,
Why?
Argentine guns just kind of hide in this blind spot. So
okay. Well, don't say that. Bruno likes those, so now other people are going to find
got one.
Oh,
so.
okay. All
right. All right. So it's lighter. It's got better balance. How's that turn down bolt handle? Is that treating you any different?
Honestly, action is just as smooth, but the cock on close doesn't really feel as bad.
Not stiff?
No, it's not as bad.
The spring might not be as fresh as this other one that we were shooting the other
Maybe.
day.
I like how used it is.
Okay.
And then it puts you just ahead of the trigger, which I think, frankly, is perfectly fine. You sweep back to it.
Yeah,
so
it's not as good as some guns, but better than others.
Yeah, I'd say it's still pretty decent. Otherwise, I mean, the flag safeties... Actually, if anything, this one feels a little bit worn.
It's a little stiffer. That gun actually required some work on my part.
Huh.
Because the safety was snagging. I had to kind of get a little file out and clean up the burrs. Because again, we talked about this last episode, the Argentinians like to fall out of that engagement surface. I don't know why, but for some reason they really like to.
Well, maybe they aren't as, maybe people shouldn't be buying them as much.
Oh yeah, they're awful. Stay away.
And then I love the rear sight, this petite little rear sight that goes with it, for the carbine. And then I love the feature that you kind of pointed out, how it kind of locks into place.
Yeah.
It's neat.
Yeah, it's cute.
Perfectly cute idea. And then I guess the only other thing really is just that maybe the handguard kind of fits it a little bit better.
Yeah.
Just in terms of it's almost right there with the barrel band. It is kind of weird how it stops just behind it. This isn't like a reproduction.
No, I think that's correct.
Okay.
I don't know if it was fitted later. It might be a replacement. But the tiny handguard makes a lot more sense to me on the tiny carbine where you don't have a bayonet. You're just grabbing it to move it. You don't necessarily need the full handguard.
God, I can't get over this length and just this weight feel. This kind of feels like almost like one of those little kids' trainer rifle things that they would hand, pass to Johnny. Here you go, kiddo.
So you shoulder this up.
Yep.
And you pull the trigger. How was the trigger on this one versus the last one?
Very, very smooth. Right. I like the trigger on this one a lot, actually.
I think something went up with this in 1891. I don't think it got a fair representation last time.
That's fair.
I think there's something funky with this trigger.
That's why I said I didn't know if it was just the individual or if it was as a whole, because from what I understand internally, pretty dang spot on for this guy.
Now, with all that weight off the gun, recoil miserable?
It was a lot. But the weird thing is I don't think it seemed like on video it was climbing that bad, but it did feel like there was substantial recoil to this one.
How's that butt plate? Did you feel like you're getting beat up like a Berthier?
I didn't get any sort of bruising or anything like that, but it did kind of...
You never get bruising.
Well, no. I mean, that's what I'm trying to think, like the Air Service rifle when I was firing that one. I got a tiny little...
You've gotten bruised. Mae's been bruised twice in this show.
Yeah.
The Air Service rifle mag dump. And the T-Gewehr, which gave her like a nickel-sized little...
That one was
you would think it'd be black and blue,
far.
but it was just a little bit of a thing.
Yeah. But no, it just felt like there was a lot of impact for the shoulder. And again, when I was actually shooting, I think I was holding it well enough that the climb wasn't bad. But in the high speed, I really tried to let it kind of just see what it would do, and it got pretty up there.
I kind of enjoyed the recoil on this one.
I enjoyed it.
Well, when I shot it, I expected... Not maybe Berthier, but I expected...
Close-ish.
Somewhere in the vicinity of a Berthier or a Mosin M44 or an Austrian 1895 Stutzen or something like that.
Oh, the Stutzen. That kicks butt.
In 8x50, not 8x56.
Okay.
And I found this to actually be a little more pleasant than those. Not much more, but it exists somewhere in the spectrum between the soft shooting 6.5 Swedish carbine / short rifles and say an 8x50 Austrian Mannlicher. I think it's somewhere in that space, more to the 8x50 side. I found it to be actually more controllable than I expected. I wouldn't say it was pleasant, And it threw a fireball worse than I thought it would.
Oh, it was a great fireball.
Yeah. But I thought it was okay.
Okay.
But what did you think? I mean,
I think it was just a bit heavy on the side of moderate.
Was it enough for that you felt like you would prefer to have the long rifle?
God, no.
Okay.
I'd take this all day long.
How was your grouping?
Very, very tight. It was actually, it was probably one of my best groupings, I think, with a rifle.
And yet no semi-pistol grip?
No, well, that's what I was saying.
The
false one that this creates is actually pretty good.
Good enough, yeah.
Yeah, I like it. I'd say that that's just enough. Like, honestly, maybe they didn't need semi-pistol grips. Maybe they just need a little bit of a nubbin right there. Just enough for me to push up against.
So,
Yeah. Overall glowing review on this guy for me.
Okay,
personally.
so we like this.
Yes.
All the way into Great War, usable, right?
Oh, I can't see why not.
Okay, yeah, I think
that's there. It's pretty dang good.
It is a testament to the 1891, by the way, that it would, we get the label, and by World War I, we're going, you can use it, but God.
Right.
The 1891, you could issue this in a World War I setting, not that it was there at all, but in that sort of setting, we're talking about, we've gone all the way into the 19-teens. This is still feeling very competitive.
Yeah, it definitely is.
I'm not feeling like I would go up against the Mauser 98 and not be able to come out on top. All I'd have to do is be better at aiming and pulling the trigger. It doesn't feel like the gun's going to fail me against the Mauser 98.
Right. I feel like there are very few things that if I were handed instead of that, like if I were told, you are going to get this, 1891 carbine, but now we're giving these instead. I feel like there are very few things that I'd be like, oh, great, I would prefer that over it. Because it's a pretty solid carbine.
You'd actually have to be offered another carbine of some sort, or a semi-automatic rifle or something for this to get you.
Well, obviously, yeah. Totally different category, though.
Right. Okay, so let me make sure I'm grabbing the right thing here. Whoa,
just got all the rifles over there.
We're back to weight.
To be fair, that one's easier to spot with that long of a rear sight.
Yes, we now have the Peruvian 1891.
Hooray.
Cock on close. Other than the fact that the handguard is just a itty bit shorter, about maybe 1/8 of an inch too short.
Okay.
It is correct in its configuration.
Okay.
So let me get this into your hands.
All right. Feels like it's been sanded.
Yeah, that gun, I'm not sure. So the thing about the Peruvian stocks are very interesting. I believe they were made specifically for these guns when they were updated.
It's like really fine sandpaper.
The Peruvian stocks don't seem to be original 1891 stocks. They appear to have actually been recut when they were refinished. And they all seem to have differences. Yeah, I've only handled 2, but both of them are kind of textured like that. So I'm not sure if they were not as finely finished because they were an auxiliary weapon.
I do remember this while handling it. I was like, I don't like the feel of this. It kind of makes my skin crawl.
It may also be that they were soaked in oil at some point. I'm not really sure.
And then dried out really sadly.
I mean, I don't know. But you are right. There is sort of a wood difference and a finish difference.
It's just not real wood.
Okay, so other than setting off your weird... there's that one cider brand that has the fuzzy can. May doesn't like the fuzzy can.
Yeah, Black Widow.
Yeah, she doesn't like the can at all.
I can't handle it. It's a delicious drink. Can't touch the can to save my life.
On the spectrum.
Yeah. So aside from the feels on that, I'm trying to get over it. It really does feel a lot like our 1891 long rifle that we handled previous episode.
Here it is.
I can't say there are any remarkable differences
Shoulder that real quick. Shoulder it real quick.
Shoulder?
Yeah.
Okay.
Feel the weight. Feel the weight.
Yeah.
All right. Don't worry about the sights. Just feel the weight. Other than the fact that that's nice and smooth and not all weird.
That feels heavier. Is that one supposed to be heavier?
Which one feels heavier?
That one feels heavier.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, good.
It's got a heavier barrel.
Hooray.
Does it stand out?
When it handed back to back, yes. When I was on range, I didn't notice.
Okay. What about the balance point?
So
you almost have to go further forward.
A little further forward, just a touch.
Okay.
Not much though. And then obviously, long of a rear sight.
Yeah.
So, outward appearance wise, those are the major differences you could probably just gather just from immediately being handed it and looking at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That sight stands out quite a bit.
Sure. And then we go to actually using it.
Okay.
The action on this one, I'm assuming, is not in the best condition, simply because it was a little difficult to... I had to baby it a bit because I remember like at one point, you know, an extra round flew out or it got stuck improperly. Like it just wasn't cycling rounds very cleanly.
The interrupter kind of let it fly one time, or the feed lips let one fly one time. I don't know that we have that in the footage. And then the ejector was soft to the point that we actually swapped them. So at the moment, the ejector for my firearm, well, they both belong to me, but the ejector for that one's in there. I need to actually order a replacement now that we're talking about it.
Okay, there you go. You're welcome for reminding me.
The ejector spring had gotten, I don't know, just worn down. And it just wasn't putting a lot of pressure down on the ejector spring.
Sitting there with the bolt. The bolt would bring it back, but then it would just sit there. And
or it would kind of flip it out.
Yeah, just like,
And these guns usually show signs of prior pitting or other problems under a deep reblued bluing. So they are very much a slow, not slapdash, because the sights seem to be fitted properly. They've had new stocks on them. But they are just sort of like, they must have gotten roughed up and then recoated. And it kind of shows a little bit.
Yeah. Just in terms of the action, how it feels. Now, when I actually fired it, the target hits were pretty solid.
How was the trigger on this one then?
You know what's kind of interesting? I'm sitting here poop talking the action. I'll say the curse
I gotcha.
The trigger was actually pretty smooth on this one. I think it may have even been smoother than the carbine.
Yep.
Which is saying something, considering.
So the Peruvian had the nicest break. It was just, go.
Yeah. So, what I think is going to be a horrible condition rifle, it actually ended up hitting paper pretty
Your
pretty
grouping
well.
was much better
yes.
than the 1891
Far
normal
better.
rifle, which, again,
Far
had
better.
trigger issues.
Yeah.
Would you say that was the trigger, or would you blame it on the long vizier sight?
That one is kind of nice to look down because it is like a railway almost. Like you're just kind of like looking down it. Like it pretty much does draw the eye. Now, granted, not great for how much your vision's blocked by it, I would say.
Yeah, the long vizier is one of the sights where it's actually kind of comfortable target shooting.
Yes.
You had no problems with it on paper, right?
No.
How much would you love to have that sight with people running around shooting at you at different points in your vision?
Oh, it's great. It's fun. Just make sure they don't get behind any of the wings of the racetrack there.
Yeah, just wipe out your peripheral.
But, I mean, yeah, that being said, just for target shooting, not too bad.
Okay. And then any particular impression of that heavy barrel? Because that is a chonky mother.
I mean, aside from just obvious that it's heavy, the recoil honestly didn't feel like it was mitigated much more by comparison.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably almost dead on with
pretty
1891.
much spot on. So I can't say it did much other than just shooting the 5 rounds that I did. I'm not shooting like 50 rounds. Maybe after 50 they'd make a difference, but 5 rounds with it, not a huge difference between that and the Argentine 91 feel.
So if you had to choose between the two, the Argentine long rifle or the Peruvian long rifle?
Well, crap. Can I disregard the trigger of the 91?
Of course. If we took the trigger group out of this one and the bolt out of this one and put it in that long rifle, it would end up the long rifle would shoot. Yeah, I mean, sure, take the turn down, who cares? The long rifle would end up shooting as smooth as this in the trigger.
Right.
You know?
Then I would think that I would definitely take the Argentine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just because it's clearly
what about Peruvian versus carbine?
Well, carbine doesn't really have a competition.
What if I told you there were Peruvian carbines?
Really? Interesting.
They were cut downs. It was just this. It clearly looked like somebody had made this and then come along later and cut it down. And it would have been
still have the long of a zero sight?
Yes. And
they didn't change the sight.
It's a short rifle length. I didn't really bother to get one for the episode.
I want to try that.
Yeah. We know
that sounds funny.
They know there's even less to speculate on when it comes to the carbines. You know what I mean? There's very little we know about the carbines, let alone this. So I kind of let them sit until more hard data shows up.
How do they think they shoot with a long of a zero if they didn't change the sights? How do you think it did for accuracy? Oh, okay.
It's probable that whatever role they were in, they weren't meant to be used beyond 400 yards or so, and therefore, why would you change it when the zero is going to work across? You know, it's a flat shooting Spitzer. It's going to have.
Sure, you're not wrong. That sounds awesome to me, though. I need to try that.
Yeah, fair.
Okay.
Anyway, I think that's really got us covered, right? Any more?
Nothing else super remarkable about it, I guess. I can't really think of anything else to add to it.
All right, well, that's 3 1891s in the bag and all on range.
Woo!
Now, for this episode, we did not have any executive producers.
It's true.
And no one wanted to be named on their loaner, so we actually get to roll right into our credits.
Well, if anyone is curious about the executive producer thing, oldgunshow.com, go to the contact form and you can pop us an inquiry there.
Yeah, it's like a one-time super payment to get an episode done.
True.
And I can kind of give you a short list of what we're working on if you'd like to kind of pick where you'd like to put your money.
There have been some people, especially when it came to like the Colt 1911 episode, we had people who specifically were like, I want that one, that one.
All right, well, thank you all for joining us. Have a good one.
Thanks, guys.
Alpha has headed up the Revolver project, which I want to remind everybody about again. If you go to revolvers.C&Rsenal.com, the most complete index of drawings for revolver patents ever.
To exist.
Danny from Cody was texting me about something, and I sent him a link over there, and I was like, oh yeah, we got it over in the index. And he was like, I haven't looked at this in a while. Oh my God.
Yes.
And I went, I know. And he goes, this is an insane resource. So then Nicholas comes over, and she gives him a pie. And he's looking at the cookies, and I can't remember what was said, and you're like, well, that's got spray paint on it. And he goes, what? And you're like, I couldn't get the color right with normal baking, so I just spray painted them. So don't eat those. And he looks down at the pie, and I was because I was like, in that moment, I went, he's going to go home and throw that thing in the garbage. And you saw it too, and you're like, there's no spray paint in the pie. Perfect at everything guy who is always right. The antagonist is the guy that's like practically wetting himself while still holding it together.
He was wetting himself that one episode going down the wave.
That's true. And yet, he still holds in there and does what he's supposed to do as a man.
Right.
And
which is why his crew respects the hell out of him. They're like, yeah, that guy's our leader. Yeah, because he is like us. He is terrified, but he's doing his shit anyway because he's a man.
My favorite character is the antagonist because I identify with him way more. He's just white knuckling it the whole time, just being like, I just got to do this or else I'm weak, you know?
Right.
You're going, I feel you, man.
Yeah.
Like, and of course, our arm. Although in this case, much like many originals, this one tends to kind of snick into place right there, which I'm not sure if was intentional or is a product of being banged along the way. However, if it stays in this position and you draw the pistol, gravity will not free this arm to fall, and if you fire it,